Here is a number that should be one of the most famous in golf, and almost nobody can tell you whose it is. 88. 88 professional tournament victories. That is more than Sam Snead won on the PGA Tour. It is more than Tiger Woods won on the PGA Tour. It is, as far as the record books allow us to say, the most tournaments any human being has ever won on a single professional golf tour. And it has stood for decades with nobody remotely close to it. The person who won them was a tall, quiet woman from a town of a few thousand people in the New Mexico desert. And if you stopped 100 golf fans outside any clubhouse in America and asked them to name the winningest golfer in the history of the professional game, you might get one who says Kathy Whitworth. You might get none. So this is the story of the most successful golfer nobody talks about. How good she actually was at her peak. Why the record has never been threatened. And the specific, unglamorous reasons the sport managed to forget the person who holds it. Start in Jal, New Mexico, because the beginning explains a great deal about the ending. Jal sits in the far southeast corner of the state, in oil country, close enough to the Texas line that the whole area feels like Texas. Her family ran a hardware store. She was born in Monahans, across the border in Texas, in 1939, and grew up in Jal, and by her own cheerful account, she was not, as a young girl, an obvious candidate for greatness at anything athletic. She was big for her age. She was self-conscious about it. She tried tennis first. She picked up golf at 15, which is late, and she was immediately obsessively serious about it in a way that surprised everybody, including her. And then the thing happened that changes the whole trajectory, and it is the kind of thing that only happens by luck. Her family found her a teacher, not a local pro who could tidy up her grip. Harvey Penick. Harvey Penick, in Austin, Texas, is one of the great teachers in the history of the sport. The man who taught Ben Crenshaw and Tom Kite, whose little red notebook of golf wisdom became one of the best-selling sports books ever written. And a teenage girl from an oil town in New Mexico was driven across Texas to take lessons from him. What Penick gave her was not a swing exactly, it was permission. The story she told for the rest of her life is that he told her, early on, that she could be a great player. Not a good one, great. And she believed him, because he was Harvey Penick, and he did not say things he did not mean. She turned professional at 20 in 1958, and here is the part that gets skipped in the highlight version. She was not immediately good. Her first years on tour were rough. She finished well down the money list. She was, by the standards of a professional athlete, struggling, and she stayed out there anyway, on a tour where the purses were small enough that struggling was an expensive hobby rather than a career. Her first win came in 1962. She was 22, and then the floodgates opened, and what follows is one of the strangest, sustained runs of dominance in the history of any sport. Because Kathy Whitworth did not have a great season, she had a great decade, and then she kept going. Let me put the peak in the plainest terms available. Through the middle and late 1960s and into the 1970s, she was named the LPGA's Player of the Year 7 times. She won the Vare Trophy, which goes to the player with the lowest scoring average across a season 7 times. She was the leading money winner 8 times. And she won at least one golf tournament every single year for 17 consecutive seasons. Sit with that last one, because it is the statistic that best captures what she actually was. 17 straight years of winning. Not contending, winning. Through swing changes, through the arrival of new stars, through the tour changing its schedule and its sponsors and its television arrangements around her. From her early 20s into her late 30s, she never once had a year where she failed to beat everybody in the field at least once. In her best seasons, she won 8, 9, 10 times in a year. There are seasons in that stretch where she won more tournaments than most excellent professionals win in a career. And in 1965, and again in 1966, the Associated Press named her the Female Athlete of the Year, which meant she was judged the best sportswoman in America, in a country that had plenty of them, 2 years running. So the question that hangs over this whole video is a simple one. If you were that dominant for that long, and the wider sporting press was giving you national awards, how did the memory of it evaporate? There are 4 reasons, and none of them is that she was not good enough. The first is television, and it is the largest by a distance. Men's golf in the 1960s was being carried into American living rooms every weekend by the networks, and the men on that broadcast, Palmer and Nicholas and Player, became household faces because a camera was pointed at them every Sunday. Women's golf was barely televised at all. A tournament might get a highlights package or nothing. Whitworth's entire prime happened, functionally, off camera. The footage of the best golfer in America simply was not made. The second is the majors problem, and this one is genuinely thorny. The definition of what counted as a women's major shifted repeatedly across her career. Events that were treated as majors at the time were later downgraded or ceased to exist. The Title Holders Championship, which she won twice, folded. The Western Open, which she won, is gone. So her major total, usually given as 6, sits on a foundation that keeps being renegotiated by history, and a career that is difficult to compare cleanly across eras is a career that gets left out of arguments. The third reason is the one that hurt her personally, and it is the reason she is sometimes described as the greatest player never to win the biggest prize. She never won the US Women's Open, the one that everybody outside the sport recognises, the one with the national championship attached to it, is the one she could not close. She contended, she finished second, and she retired with 88 victories, 7 Player of the Year awards, and a hole in the middle of her record where the most famous trophy in her sport should have been, which is a genuinely strange thing to carry. She was asked about it constantly, for decades, and she answered it graciously every time, which is its own kind of endurance. And the fourth reason is money, and this is where her story stops being about golf and becomes about something larger. In 1981, Kathy Whitworth became the first woman in the history of the LPGA to earn $1 million in career prize money. That was a landmark. It was reported as a landmark, and it took her more than 20 years, and by that point, most of 80-odd victories to get there. Her total career earnings across the whole run come to somewhere around $1.7 million. Now hold that number against the modern game. A single win at a signature event on the men's tour today pays several $1 million. A player can, in one Sunday afternoon, earn more than Kathy Whitworth earned by winning 88 golf tournaments. That is not a criticism of the modern player. It is a measurement of what she was working with. The purses on the LPGA in the 1960s were small. The travel was self-funded. The players drove themselves between events, and several of them worked club jobs in the off-season because the tour did not pay enough to live on across a full year. Which means the winningest golfer in the history of the professional game spent her prime years being paid roughly what a decent regional sales manager made, and doing it in obscurity, and coming back the next week to do it again. And that reframes the 17 consecutive winning seasons entirely. Nobody sustains that on money, because there was not any. She did it because she wanted to be great, and Harvey Penick had told her she could be, and she had decided to find out. There is a detail from the working life of that era that I think says everything, and it is the one that ought to be better known. The players on that tour built it themselves. The LPGA in its early decades was not a corporate structure with a marketing department. The women in it ran the tournaments, negotiated with sponsors, set up the courses, handled the paperwork, and then went out and played. Whitworth herself served as the tour's president, more than once, in the middle of her competitive prime. Think about the arithmetic of that. She was simultaneously the best player in the world and an administrator of the organisation she was beating, doing committee work in the evenings during weeks when she was leading tournaments. No male player of comparable stature in that era was doing anything remotely like it. Nicholas was not handling sponsorship paperwork for the PGA Tour in between rounds. And the sport she helped build eventually got rich and got televised and got the sponsorship and the prize money and the profile. And by then her playing career was over, and the machine that makes people famous had not been pointed at her when it mattered. She stayed in the game afterwards. She taught. She captained the first United States Solheim Cup team in 1990, which is a nice piece of symmetry. The woman who spent her career winning without an audience being handed the leadership of the event designed to give women's golf exactly the audience it had lacked. She went into the halls of fame. She was, within the sport, enormously respected. Ask any professional golfer, man or woman, who has actually looked at the record, and you will get the correct answer immediately, because inside the industry, there is no argument about what she was. She died on Christmas Eve, 2022, at 83, at a family gathering. The obituaries ran correctly with the number in the first line. 88 wins, more than anyone, ever, on a single tour. And for about a week, a lot of people learned that fact for the first time. So how good was she in her prime? Honestly, here is the fair assessment. At her peak, she was doing to her sport what the most dominant men have done to theirs, over a longer continuous stretch than almost any of them managed. The Player of the Year awards and the scoring titles say she was not simply winning through volume. She was the best ball striker and the best scorer of her era by the measures available. The 17-year winning streak says the peak was not a 2-year flash, but a plateau she lived on. The honest caveat, which this channel is obliged to state, is that the depth of professional women's golf in the 1960s was thinner than the depth of the men's game, and thinner than the women's game became a generation later. Fewer players, less money drawing talent in, fewer countries feeding the pipeline. She was not beating a 200-deep global field every week, but then neither was anybody else in that decade, in either tour, and the men of that era are not asked to caveat their records. And the players she was beating, week after week, were the best of that generation, and they went home and told anyone who asked that she was on a different level. 88 wins, 7 Player of the Year awards, 17 straight winning seasons, $1.7 million total for all of it. There is a version of this sport's history where that person is a household name, and the version we actually got is the one where you had to watch a video about her to learn she existed. So tell me in the comments, because I am curious and I think the answer says something. Before today, could you have named the golfer with the most professional wins in history? Be honest, nobody is checking. And if you want another story from the era when the best golfer in America could win everything and still not get on television, the woman who made the cut against the men in 1945 and got the rules changed to stop it happening again is on this channel, and it is the same disease in an earlier stage.